Well, just to get started, Teresa, like I said, I really enjoyed just hearing about your story and then all the things that I read. It talked about how with your new book, Sanctuary of Sound, that you kind of started with, the initial history here in the Muskogee Nation and who all has owned that. And I guess my first question for you is, I guess what really inspired you to start focusing on history and not only preserving that, but educating others about the history of this great city?
Well, thank you, and thank everyone for being here. This is really a nice crowd, and of course, I live down the street, so I absolutely love this place. So thank you for being here. You're right, I am a fourth generation Oklahoman. My mother was born in the 30s in Pahuska, and my dad was born in the 30s in Perkins, and way before statehood, their grandparents were here. And so I just really love our state. And, growing up here, I was the person that knew all the trivia about Oklahoma. And so it really did give me a sense of pride from, the parking meter to everything else that was invented here. And that really translates into historic preservation on buildings. And then when you find a building that you love, or it tends to love you back, and it really does bring you in, then you think about the people of those buildings and what their story was like and what was happening in our city during that time period. I always, and maybe you guys have felt this way too, I wish I could be a time traveler. I'd go back to, the 1920s, or really right after statehood in Oklahoma, what was happening through. I am a wannabe groupie so badly. I would go back to 1972. I would be with George Harrison. I would be with Eric Clapton. I would be with Leon Russell. And so I just am so proud of our heritage in our state and our musical heritage. It's very magical. And so it just kind of gave me a sense of identity. I started collecting memorabilia when I was 8 years old. And before I even acquired the church studio, I had about a 5,000 piece collection of things centered around not only Leon Russell, but J.J. Cale, and what we call, as an outsider, the Tulsa Sound. And so I'd like to collect and bring those stories to life.
I love hearing that. I feel like I'm learning stuff just in your one quick response there. I had no idea that Tulsa was where parking meters were created. But I'm excited to tell my colleagues at the city about that. I have ancestry with the Osage Nation as well, so really happy to hear that your family has origins back in Alaska. That's wonderful. And man, I love someone who's been a history nerd for Tulsa all their life, even outside of their work. I wish I could tell you I had that same drive for being this invested in our history growing up. Well, you talked a little bit about your love of history overall, but I think a lot of us would like to know what was your inspiration behind, this book specifically, and maybe the renovation of Church Studio.
Well, the building needed an identity. It had been around a long time, and it's been around 110 years. But it's almost like an unmarked grave. We hear a lot about that these days, and it just doesn't sit well with you when you have something like that. And this church, this building, is just incredible. If you think about not very many buildings in our city, we only became a state in 1907, but how many buildings can say that they have survived World War I, the Great Depression, the race massacre, World War II, the Vietnam War? Not very many buildings. So we're probably in the top 10 oldest buildings in our city, but we're definitely the second oldest church, only by 1 year. But no one knew that. There have been 5 owners between Leon Russell and myself. No one had documented the history. Leon didn't know the history. He did not know the denomination of the church. And then when I did further research, I realized that this building had no blueprints, had no architects. The people built this church. They were strategically located east of downtown Tulsa. And I thought that was really interesting. One of the first things that I did, I bought the building sight unseen. I was so obsessed with it. That's a whole other story, but went to Guarantee Abstract, closed on the deal, and walked in for the first time. But one thing that really caught my attention are all the wood species throughout the property. So as I was walking through, there's a little red oak, a little white oak, a little mahogany and fir and maple, and that was very interesting to me. It wasn't off-putting, but we have so many beautiful, pristine buildings because with the oil barons, money was no object back in the day, so they got the best architects in the world to come to Tulsa and help us build our city. But with this, it was really strange. And then I found, starting about 1913, the ladies of the church were putting these little advertisements in the Tulsa Daily World, our local newspaper, and they said, if you are a bricklayer, if you're a mason, if you have any scrap wood, help us build this church and we will pay you with a chicken dinner. And so something that was a little off-putting became such a beautiful part of the provenance of this building. And you think about these early Tulsa settlers building this church, very different than our fancy churches, but something for the people, by the people. And learning all of those things from the Methodist archive. I befriended the great-grandson of the original pastor. I learned things from his family and their documentation about the church being integrated in 1915, which tells a very interesting part of our city's history. And so I got kind of paranoid, like, what if, something happens to me? And I ended up interviewing over 400 people, and I'm continuing to interview people to capture that history. I've never written a book, but I just felt like I really needed to do that.
Wow, that is just so impressive to hear. 400 people alone, I think, is impressive. How do you have the time to run a studio on top of that? I'm just so impressed in hearing that. I got to flip through your book a little bit before we got started, and I loved hearing that too, that it was, this really what seems like a place of community that I feel like right now everybody is really searching for in a way. And, I wish that, it's funny that they were offering chicken dinners as payment because a lot of the organizing I do, we always kind of talk about how food and a free t-shirt can really go a long way. And it sounds like that's kind of always been the case. Well, I know that this hasn't been your only project, and I still have lots of questions, but I'm sure others in the audience do too, so I wanted to give people an opportunity to ask any questions that they might have.
It may be too early for this, but can you give us a run-through of everybody who's recorded in that studio? Not everybody.
Yeah, I would love to do that.
It's only an hour long event.
I know, and I love that it's a living, breathing, working studio today, so we are continuing that history and adding to our alumni. What's interesting is this past week, we learned that Ricky Nelson recorded Wild Nights in Tulsa in 1974 at the studio, and that had never been documented, going back to the early church having no identity, but really there's not a lot of documentation during Leon's time. There are a lot of people that are still around that have stories, but not everyone's memory is the same. But probably the biggest artist to record in there and become famous and really be discovered here in Tulsa is Tom Petty and Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Bob Dylan's been in the studio, Kansas. We have some 2-inch tape right now that we are digitizing. It's early Kansas and it's fantastic. Stevie Wonder, we had always heard that, but there was no documentation until this past year. We have some photographs of Stevie Wonder and the Gap Band. Of course, the Gap Band, they were discovered in there. They were Leon's backup band. I think I mentioned Eric Clapton. Let's see, so many others, Taj Mahal. George Harrison. Ringo has been in the studio as well. Robert Plant, we have a recording of Robert Plant's guitar playing, and that has never been documented. So it's been really wonderful, capturing all of that and getting it documented. But Eric Clapton, yes, Eric even lived in Tulsa for a period of time. And so definitely, and you think about it, Leon Russell was #1 touring artist in America in 1972. He's at the height of his career when he decided to come back to his hometown of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and turn this old church, and it was old then and a little bit dilapidated, into this amazing recording studio. He could have gone anywhere, but I think he was a little bit tired of what was happening in California. You know, the pressure, the disruption, just like today, there's disruption in almost every industry. There was a lot of disruption going on in the music industry in the early 70s, but he bought the church. He quickly converted it from a church to a recording studio and home office to Shelter Records. And it was a very interesting business model. It was short-lived, really. Its period of significance is, 1969 to 1976, but it made a huge impact. So Leon was like the musician's musician, so he attracted all different types of artists to come back or to come to Tulsa and record. And he also gave a lot of opportunities to local musicians that went on to their own superstardom, like the Gap Band. I don't think they would have achieved, they may have, but opening that door and being affiliated with Leon and his record label, I think went a long ways. Same with, Mudcrutch, which turned into be Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers.
How did you decide who got to have a stained glass window up at the top of the church?
Yeah, so the early church, during the renovation, we discovered pieces of stained glass on the lower level. Leon had extracted that stained glass to put acoustic panels and sound treatment in the sanctuary, but it was always part of the building's history. And I thought, you know what, we need to put stained glass back in. So on the very top, the belfry, we do have multiple windows that are covered on the outside, but we thought it would be an opportunity to honor legacy artists that have come through the church during the building's period of significance. And when I say period of significance, those that are into that, that's what qualified it for being on the National Register of Historic Places. So we looked at a lot of things. There's so many musicians that we wanted to put in there, especially local legends. But we actually, I'm embarrassed to say this, but we looked at how many awards, if they're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, how many Grammy Awards, that sort of thing. So we landed on some really great artists that are part of our history. We have Leon Russell, of course. We have Elton John. We have Tom Petty. We have Charlie Wilson of the Gap Band. We have George Harrison, Bob Dylan, and Willie Nelson.
Yes.
Yeah, so Willie and his sister recorded with us multiple times, so.
I think those are excellent choices. That's a great way of kind of identifying.
I know, it
who
was
gets
really
those
hard. I mean,
spots.
there's so many great musicians. How do you choose?
That's really hard. I'm glad you were making the choice. Go ahead.
Hey, I have read your book, and it is wonderful. You did a
Thank
terrific
you.
job. And as going through it, like you just discussed seeing the different woods. So when you walked in and you see this church, where does your mind start going and start thinking, what have I bought? What am I going to do? Where does your mind start processing?
Well, the building was so dilapidated. I knew it was in rough shape because prior to buying it, I had already been walking the property, picking up trash, picking up needles. It was a rough part of town in the 70s, and it continued even more so. The windows had been boarded up since the late 1980s. And so I had kind of an idea of what to expect, but nothing really prepares you when you walk up those stairs. I think part of it is that as you alluded to, it was Creek land, Muskogee Creek land, and then you think of these early Tulsa settlers that sacrificed a lot to build their own house of worship, to thinking what it must have been like for Leon Russell to walk up those stairs and walk in the room. I mean, it gave me chills, and I got really emotional, and we've seen a lot of musicians get very emotional. We've seen people like Kenny Loggins go into the space and start weeping. Jimmy Webb. I mean, so Ray Wiley Hubbard. I mean, these legendary musicians get very, very emotional when they walk into the space. And again, it's just that history. It's such a beautiful history from the early people through the height of the Tulsa sound and what happened in the 70s to really how we're using it today. We really leaned into analog. We have an amazing museum quality microphone collection to other vintage analog pieces. And I think the old timers kind of appreciate us doing that because, as you know, you can make music with your phone, and with AI, you don't even need to be a musician to make music. And so I think they really appreciate, but the sound, nothing competes with it. But a long way to answer your question, that it was really very emotional for me. And at that point, the building took a life of its own, and I had no control about what was about to happen.
Okay, I do have one question, then we can go back to some audience questions, and you kind of just spoke about it a little bit, but I guess I have one specific and one that's a little more general. I know that Paul McCartney was recently in town for his concert. Did he come by Church Studio?
He didn't. However, I know he didn't, but he did come by. I have another property called Harwelden Mansion, and we were hosting Bono and The Edge and T-Bone Burnett, and they were staying with us, and Paul came over for an evening little party that we had. So it was pretty amazing. It's still a blur to me, but.
It sounds amazing, and I think we'd all like to be a fly on that wall. Well, then my more general question is, since there are, people that are old-time musicians that have an established history there, and then I'm sure you also get, current-day musicians that are interested in recording or just seeing the space, what would you say is kind of the most common sentiment that you get from them whenever they're coming through this space?
That's a great question. I think everyone just feels a sense of pride that this is from their hometown. When I started collecting at a young age, I can't believe all these people are from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And David Gates, yes, I love soft rock. Any Bread fans out there? I collect David Gates stuff too. So, but I think they just feel like, wow, it's such an honor to be here. And Leon Russell, had this building and he recorded here. And the artists have been great. It's hard to believe, but we've had nearly 1,500 artists the past 12 months alone. And so our local artists can record at no charge. We have an artist grant program, and we have some other programming for our local artists. And they're just really excited to be there. So I think they just all, like me, just a sense of pride that, these famous people came through here. And it inspires them to think that, hey, I can take my musical career to the next level. And so.
Again, I don't know how you find the time to run a studio with that many people coming through. That's a lot in a year's time. Wow. Well, you mentioned the Harwelden Mansion, and that was something that I wanted to ask you about too. I know it's not really the center or focus of your current book. But yeah, do you want to talk to us a little bit about that project and what maybe inspired you in the same way that the church studio did?
Yeah, sure. It's another beautiful historic landmark in our city. I believe it's the 7th one to get historical designation, and which happened in the 70s. It was a fairly new program in the 70s. I was born in West Tulsa. I attended Eugene Fields, and in my younger years, I always saw that beautiful mansion on the hill. It sits on one full city block, 4 acres. And I always thought, who would live in such a house? And it was just so, it just was always something I thought about because it's very distinct, this English Tudor, but very much like the church studio, it was an impulse purchase. It went on the market. It was a home for a long time. It was built in 1923, and the lady of the house passed away in 1967 and donated it to the Arts Council of Tulsa, which turned into be AHA, which is no longer around. And they realized that it was beyond their capabilities to take care of that, and that big building, rust-looking building that they have downtown, and they put it on the market. And actually, Bodine, my favorite restaurant, put an offer on it. And as much as I love Bodine, I mean, it literally is my favorite restaurant. I thought, I cannot believe they're putting a fish market in there. And the deal fell through. And the day the deal fell through, I put an offer on it. And so I couldn't help myself. And I didn't do any inspections. Like the church studio was a 6.5-year renovation. So no mechanical, electrical, plumbing, termite, and it required a 3-year renovation. And I'm really glad I got my hands on it because, again, there was not a lot of, in fact, the one photo I found was at this place. I licensed it, and it was labeled Riverside Drive, and I did a double take because I looked at thousands of photos, and I could not believe there was not an archive or any documentation on this beautiful building. There was a little bit, but not what you would think. And so we started building, and learning about that building and documenting that, and it's very different than our early church Methodist story of the church studio and our musical heritage. It is an oil baron, Earl P. Harwell, that, he was under the radar. You hear about Skelly and J. Paul Getty and Phillips and all of those guys, but you never heard about Mr. Harwell. And early, we have a University of Tulsa, a couple of people here, but he was one of the first donors to Kendall College. And he honors the university with Tulsa blue, that color, throughout the mansion. And one of the first donors and the co-founder of Tulsa Boys Home and the Presbyterian Church. And I thought, this is a cool guy. He did a lot of things. And he sold his company to Magnolia, which turned into Mobil, which is ExxonMobil today. And so I'm glad to give a story to someone that wasn't as known.
Well, that's a beautiful story. I love hearing that was a space that you were kind of looking at as far back as elementary school and just connected with in that way. I think it reinforces the sentiment that you said earlier that maybe you didn't choose these places, but they were drawn to them and they chose you. Yeah. I recently traveled to Palm Springs and I stayed somewhere where they said that Marilyn Monroe and JFK had formerly connected with one another. And so it just makes me very interested, I guess, in, God, again, if those walls could talk, not even with just with the original owner, but with who you're hosting there now, that's gotta be just a wonderful experience to be able to host people in a space like that.
It really is, and it's an opportunity like the church studio to sell our city. We have so much to be proud of. We haven't been a perfect city, as everyone knows in this room, but there's some neat people that came before us that did some incredible things that we all benefit from today. And I'm, honored to tell those stories as best as I can.
Well, I'll get back into audience questions real quick, but I did want to add, as someone who works with a lot of tribal nations here, given your impulses, have you ever considered gambling? Because you have really good impulses, I feel like.
I love craps.
Okay. Straight from her mouth. Okay. Any other audience questions? There we go.
I'd be very curious, what was the biggest surprise of either of those renovations where it was so unexpected?
Well, I think the church studio was the biggest surprise. I had mentioned that I bought it sight unseen. So I own a building right next to Circle Cinema. And so it had been in rough shape since the late 80s, but I love seeing that neighborhood now. It's so beautiful. And I'm not the Sweeney's. I'm right in between Circle and Sweeney's Hardware. But I found myself driving by the church. I found the owner on the tax records. I wrote him a letter, and I said, I'm a big Leon Russell fan. Would you consider selling the church? He said, it's not for sale, but meet me at Hodges Bend. Does anyone miss Hodges Bend? I love that place. And we would meet there every day. And I have never drank so much in my life. I was there, and my husband kept saying, who's this guy you're meeting with every day? I'll be coming home buzzed. And I thought, you know how you want something so badly? Because I had this collection. I told you I had thousands of pieces of Leon Russell memorabilia. And I have 3 adult children. They have zero interest in my Frank Homa pottery collection or anything else that I have. That generation. Anyway, they don't hold on to things the way we do, right? And so we met and met and met, and finally he said, okay, I'll sell it to you. So it was a napkin deal that we took to guarantee, but I walked in for the first time and it was flooded. There were animal carcasses. There were thousands of needles, not only there, but in the area. There was fire. There were a lot of encampments at the time. And so I brought in my structural engineer. So the day after I bought it, I had buyer's remorse. And I buy a lot of stuff and do a lot of stuff. I've never regretted anything. Well, that's not true. Okay, we won't go there. So anyway, I just couldn't believe what I had done. So I went home that night, just prayed. I was like, and then I woke up, I sketched our logo. I'm a big Covey fan, began with the end in mind, and then I got excited. But my first structural engineer said that they didn't think the building could be saved. I was like, come on, it's been here over a century. It can't be saved. He said it's crumbling. It's imploding from the inside out. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's terrible. I'm going to be blamed for tearing down Leon Russell's castle. And, you know, and so then I brought in Tom Wallace. Does anyone know him? Really great, and some other engineers. They said it can definitely be saved. So we took the next year, went all the way down to bedrock and rebuilt the foundation. And so that was really shocking because at first it scared me, like, what if it couldn't be saved? But I thought, no, I'm a glass is half full type person. So I think that Harweldon in particular, we found things that they covered with drywall. So the Arts Council, they weren't about historic preservation. They were putting in other nonprofits, so that wasn't their thing. So they put in, Home Depot light fixtures and drop ceilings. They put drywall over things, but we uncovered 3 safes that were covered. And so that was really fascinating. There were no jewels in them. I was like, oh my gosh, we're gonna see some Titanic action here, but no. But that was really neat. And then it just got you thinking about, wow, that they had, what did they have to put in these safes and to have a house with those things? And then we discovered a tunnel that went from the main house to the carriage house. So you think about a tunnel in the 1920s. Was that for Prohibition? Was it for tornadoes? They did have paid servants, so I had heard that maybe they had to walk underground and not be with the other people. I don't think that's the case. The more I learn about the Harwell family, but I figured out that it was just a cool thing to have a tunnel. And there are a lot of tunnels, right, in Tulsa, downtown, at the Philbrick and other places. So it's like, yeah, I have a home theater, a gym, and a tunnel. So.
I want to go on the record to say that if you ever want to get rid of your Francona product, please let me know, because I do hold on to that stuff. Okay, another audience question? Mayor Bartlett, how about it?
Teresa, besides all the musicians that have come through that you've seen grow in their capability and stature, how about the other side of it? All the engineers, the people that run the studio, that promote it, the marketing, the attorneys. Have you seen a lot of growth in that? And then, as it goes along with it, possible training of people like that for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been away from the schools for a decade, and so I never thought I would start another school, but we opened March of 2022, 3 weeks before the Bob Dylan Center, and everyone assumed that we had, organized this with the Bob Dylan Center because they bring in so many people. And so that first week we were open, we had 4,600 visitors that came through our door. And it was just insane. We have one of our docents here, and it's hard to imagine, but the day, I told you when I had buyer's remorse, I got all of our social handles, I got our website secured, and I started posting. And in 9.5 years, I've never skipped a day posting. So we have a very consistent content strategy. So our digital DNA has continued to climb. And we ordered tchotchkes and koozies and buttons for like 350 people. I wasn't prepared. And then, of course, we had to build, a curriculum for training docents and getting that. And then getting the studio up and going, I realized there aren't very many audio engineers in the marketplace. So thinking about the workforce needs to sustain the type of studio that we were destined to be, So I ended up getting licensed by the Oklahoma Board of Private Vocational Schools, and we have an institution of higher learning now. So we train audio engineers, and we'll continue doing that. We have multiple students with us now, and so we are a learning center. And so I think, I don't know what the future holds. We've just been, seeing how the public uses us, but with music programs being cut all across the city in our public institutions, we're finding more and more that not only the post-secondary institutions, our universities are calling upon us. We work with OU, OSU, TU, ORU, and NSU has a heck of a music program. So we collaborate with them, but also our public schools, they need music education, and so we've been filling in a gap with that. So I see it continuing to grow. Our digital DNA continues to climb. Don't want to brag, but our YouTube channel is our biggest platform, and we average over 2 million views every 28 days. So but you have to feed the beast. I mean, we continue putting content out, and I could easily hire 10 additional people. We don't have it in our budget, but if I did, I'd put them all on marketing, because we are a beloved Tulsa brand and a state brand, but we're a national and international brand. You guys may or may not know this, but tourism is our third biggest industry. And every week we have people from out of state, but all over the country, and in particular the UK. And so they're obsessed with all things Americana, Route 66. We're a real legitimate music city. There are a lot of fake music cities, but we're the real deal. And people want to learn about, what we have, so.
Great.
Go ahead. I'll go after.
Teresa, could you talk a little bit about your inspiration and vision for the neighborhood around the church studio and kind of what you're doing there?
Yeah, sure. So when I first got into the area and I met Mr. Steve Ripley, who had owned the church a decade before myself, because he's the one who told me that he boarded up the windows. So, he was getting stuff stolen and that sort of thing. And then when we looked at the crime stats in the neighborhood, it wasn't uncommon to see a rape, an assault, murder in the area, a lot of drug offenses. There was just a lot of things going on. And I knew that the church studio was going to take a significant investment. And I thought, can we bring artists in and they have to worry about someone breaking in their car and stealing their guitar? So I just went door to door. I asked the neighbors, I told them that what I want to do, if they'd be willing to paint and clean up their area, or if they'd be willing to sell. And luckily I was able to acquire, as much as my budget would allow at the time, about a dozen properties around in the area. And I'm really proud to say that crime is next to nothing. There's no crime there. And certain things can happen once in a while, but we're really proud of that fact. So when we have, we have a large percent of artists that come in from out of state. And, we want them to keep coming back to Tulsa, because the economic impact of what we're doing is measurable. They're spending money, they're getting hotel rooms, they're spending money with us, they're hiring local session players, we're putting our local musicians to work. And so it's been really exciting. We are part of the Pearl District, but we are applying for our own district status, and we're calling it Studio Row because there are 7 studio-related businesses in one block, with the church being the mother studio. So I'm really excited about the neighborhood, the walkability of it. There's restaurants, there's shopping, and it's growing. We have 4 available suites across the street on a renovated development that was a Chevron back in the day, so it's just continuing to grow.
As far as the teaching, I mean, could it be like a church, like a little Belmont? I mean, do you have classrooms in the facility, or do you want to could you community college with music?
Yeah, so we, I don't want to take it to what I did with the other schools with accreditation. Again, we are licensed by the State Department of Education, basically, but it's a hybrid program. Most of our curriculum is Berkeley School of Music, so they have some of the best professors in sound production, music production, recording processes, acoustics. And so we kind of white label their curriculum using their professors. And then when the students finish that, we've identified 100 core competencies that they need to be successful. And so it's very much my background, career and technical education. It doesn't lead to a degree. I have met with institutions that would like to partner, including Belmont, we have visited with, but again, our job is to get people well-trained and into the workplace as soon as possible.
If like Mac Electric ever left, I mean, could you turn that into like a academy or?
We could. I have first right of refusal on that building. So I love Jack. He's such a good neighbor for us, but we definitely could. Learning is so, we talked about disruption in industries. Learning is so crazy right now, and as students are evaluating the ROI on a college degree, we have to think about it. But there's several programs in IT, music marketing, film and entertainment that I think is worth exploring. But right now, our little audio engineering school is very, very successful. Our graduates have all gained gainful employment, including 2 that we've hired. So we only take 6 students at a time, but we definitely could, kind of been there, done that, almost 3 decades in the school business. I started my school in my early 20s, so I never thought I'd go back there, but sometimes you go back to things that you know really well, so.
I had a 2-parter, and I'll shut up. We went through the musicians that have been there. Have there been other like actors, celebrities, other people that aren't music necessarily oriented that have come in?
Yeah, definitely. Probably the strangest encounter I had was with Angelina Jolie. So she came in, she was convinced I was related to Brad Pitt. So, yeah, yes, because, well, she came in, she was the producer. We recorded some of the music for The Outsiders that was nominated for a Grammy and got a Tony Award. And we did that for Sony Music, and she came in for the recording. And she's very beautiful. She's very slim. Her skin is almost translucent. And she's very knowledgeable in recording studios because her first husband, Billy Bob Thornton, is a music guy. So I was really impressed with her gear and studio knowledge. But I made the mistake of saying, my last name is Knox because she has a child named Knox. And she goes, are you from Oklahoma? I was like, yeah, I'm born here. And she's like, you're related to him. And I was like, who? She said, that's my ex's family named Knox from Shawnee. And I have cousins in Shawnee. I was like, holy shit, I'm related to Brad Pitt. I was like, this is wild. But what's funny is I was staring at her when I first met her because she's so beautiful. Her eyes are like, she's really... And then she was staring at me, and I get red and blotchy, like I probably am now. And she was staring at me, and she would be like, yeah, and I was like, finally, I said, you're not going to hold this against me, are you? They're a client. And so that was funny. But Ethan Hawke has spent some time with us. He's doing a Waylon Jennings documentary. And so while he was in town with Sterling, recorded with us, and Keith David as well. We've had Disney people. I'm trying to think of other actors, but we've had quite a few, especially when they're in town for something that need to do some voiceovers. But we have worked with several of the film companies for recording, primarily soundtrack and music stuff, but definitely for other things.
Do you have plans to coordinate with the OK Pops Museum when it opens?
Yeah, I'd really like to. I reached out to them early on because I wanted to, they had received a Leon Russell collection, and I was excited. So I met Dr. Blackburn and Jeff Moore, and I brought a little bag of some of my items that I have in my collection. And so we talked about what the future would look like, primarily some sort of consortium with tours where someone buys one ticket and they go to OK Pop or the Bob Dylan Center in the church studio and that sort of thing. Of course, they've had a lot of changes going on. And of course, I heard today, I don't know if it's a big secret, that they reached their financial goal. I don't know. They're waiting on a signature from the state. I don't know if that's true or not, but why not? Because before, people would come into Tulsa for one day. Now they're staying 3 or 4 days, especially music lovers. And so it only makes sense for them to, go to OK Pop, Woody Guthrie, Bob Dylan. And then what we're closest to is the Outsiders House Museum. We're very close to Danny's operation, so we get a lot of that. But by far, the Bob Dylan Center drives more traffic to what we do than any other entity.
Okay, let's check with David on time real quick. How much we got?
We have time for one more question.
One more? Perfect timing.
Teresa, I want to know, you said you have all kinds of Leon Russell stories, so tell us your best one.
Well, honestly, I never met the man. So I don't have a lot of Leon Russell stories at all, because I never met him. There's a group of Leon Russell super fans called Leon Lifers. I wasn't part of that group. I worked at a local club when I was 21, hoping to meet him and many other people. Sunset Grill, if anyone remembers that on Brookside. I worked there when I was 21. But honestly, the one thing that I learned about Leon Russell that stuck with me the most is that he had cerebral palsy. I have a brother with cerebral palsy that I care for, and I was just amazed. I heard a little bit growing up that he had polio or some other congenital condition. But when I learned that, and to think he became this big, huge rock star, even though he had this disability, it contributed to his very unique piano playing style. He didn't like to talk about it. He never did. And he passed away 2 months after we bought the church. And so I had this dream that he was going to be on our advisory board and he was going to tell me what to do with everything. Because people that are close to him told me that he'd be probably horrified that there's a statue. And I brought out all this stuff, and he probably would be uncomfortable talking about his medical. But I can't tell you, the kids and the people was like, wow, he had that. He had something that I had, or I had, something, but he still made it. That someone from Tulsa, Oklahoma could get as famous and be as successful and influence so many people the way that he did. I wish I would have met him, but I never did.
Wow, that was so many beautiful stories that we were able to learn from you, Teresa. I do want to make one more plug for you all to, not only become members of the museum. I'm a board member here, so that's part of my role up here as well. So please do that. Continue to get involved in these events. And then also purchasing Teresa's book. Like she said, all the money goes back to Church Studio. They're in the Pearl District. Let's help them be the gemstone of Tulsa that we all know that they are. And let's give her one last round of applause.
And I want to say thank you. I've so looked forward to you speaking here at the museum. By the way, a natural progression from Dylan, OK Pop to Dylan to Church Studio to the Museum of Tulsa History.
I like what David has done with the branding, the signage, that there's I've never seen excitement about. This place is amazing. I love it, but what you've done is incredible. Welcome to Tulsa, and thank you for everything you've done.
Some thank you. Melinda McDaniel is responsible for the goodies out there, and there's still some, so you're welcome to, if you're waiting to have Teresa sign a book, you can still have drink and food, so please do so. I want to thank